Everything about dealing with groups seems relatively easy until you start to realize just how many possible groups you could potentially create in your organization. I mean, if you think about just the different, I don't know, the different departments that exist in your prototypical company, your sales and your finance and your executives, those are at least the start. But then as you start moving into ever more complex structures, you start needing to do things for individual, perhaps, groups within those groups. Maybe inside of sales, there's inside sales and outside sales. And even inside of inside sales, there's the inside sales team that has to do with Project X and the inside sales team that has to do with Project Y. And so because of that, you can almost tell the age of an Active Directory infrastructure by the sheer number of groups that exist. It is rare that you ever find yourself removing groups. Instead, all too often, you just create new groups for every new need. Now, Microsoft actually has a kind of best practice approach for configuring the nesting of one type of group into another. But however, when you start poking around in different organizations, you find that not a lot of organizations actually use this group nesting. So I'm going to show you the best practices approach, and I'm going to tell you what I've seen in the world. And you can choose to do it via the best practices approach or via the not entirely great, but what seems to be the in practice approach just about everywhere. If you follow Microsoft's recommendation, your users go in global groups. And so global groups define the different types of functions that users may participate in. So finance, sales, IT, inside sales, and what have you. Those global groups are then supposed to go into domain local groups. And it is the domain local groups that constrain the types of accesses that people should have access to. For that reason, you assign permissions then to the domain local groups. This separation of who you are, the global group, from what you should access, the domain local group, helps ensure that you don't end up giving the right group the wrong access. Now you might be thinking, why in the world would I do this? If you think about the group, the only real way you have to determine what that group is has to do with the name. And then identifying where those groups are actually applied can get very difficult as your number of servers goes up and the number of possible places where permissions can get assigned goes up. And so separating out the functions, who a person is, from the locations where they need access can help ensure that you don't end up putting the right person in the wrong place, particularly when the only thing you have to go on is the name of the group itself. The acronym that I learned 1,000 years ago for this was UGLA, or users go into global groups go into local groups, and local groups get assigned permissions. There are other acronyms out there that essentially say the same thing, but it's the UGLA acronym that I remember from the earliest days of studying for my first MCSE. Now, I told you that in the real world, you don't often see the UGLA approach implemented in its entirety, and that is, as we've moved towards more of a single domain, single forest model for a lot of organizations, the differences between global groups and domain local groups become less relevant. Remember that a global group can only include objects from the same domain, whereas a domain object can include objects from any domain in the forest. And so when you get into that single domain, single forest infrastructure, the domain local group and the global group are kind of almost sort of the same thing because there are no other domains in the forest. And so in production, sometimes you will see just the exclusive use of global groups as the mechanism for defining permissions and categorizing users. I am by no means suggesting that this is the best approach, but it is one that you see commonly in a lot of organizations. Now let me show you an example of where this can actually make things go awry. Let's talk about just different global groups existing in other groups. So back here in our list of users, we have that domain admins security group. This is the global group. And we also have back here under company users, the extremely untrusted users that we created. Let's say that you don't implement things using a best practice approach and you use your global groups for a variety of different purposes. And when you do that, let's say that someone for one reason or another gets a request to add in to the domain admins group another group. Somebody calls into the help desk and says, hey, you know what? I need to get access to the domain admins group. And can you just add in this other group as a member of domain admins, the extremely untrusted users group here? Now, this is an obvious example of something you wouldn't want to do, but I'm guessing in your Active Directory domain, you don't have a group called extremely untrusted users. That might be the inside sales admin team or something else that may not be very well worded. So I want to just kind of show you how remarkably easy it can be based off of group nesting for the wrong group to end up a member of the wrong group. When this happens, it can be phenomenally difficult to figure out what went wrong and why people have access to the wrong resources.